As far as when it comes to the suspense over round 2 of dialogue that is expected to happen, we know where, but when? Well, that, however, seems likely in the next 24 hours. Iran, however, says it is unsure that if they'll be attending the talks. Remember, this is a similar statement that came in from Iran even during the first round of talks, where certain preconditions were held by Iran before joining the talks in Islamabad. Now, the Iranian Foreign Ministry has issued a statement saying that they're unsure, hitting out at the US and saying that it is the United States which is not serious about the talks, which is not serious about peace. However, Tehran now seems to be drawing a clear red line over the talks. And Iran, however, says that when it comes to their priorities, that national interest will top. And however, they are still unclear about the participation in the talks that will happen in Islamabad, because Pakistan has been readying itself. There has been a lot of tight security that has been put in place, and there is a lot of anticipation that is now also building from both sides, whether it comes to a delegation that will be dispatched from the United States, and remains to be seen, because Tehran still is in a wait-and-watch position as far as what its next decision could be. Because as far as seeking Lebanon to be in part of the ceasefire, there is a separate ceasefire that has already been announced between Lebanon and Israel. But this time, will Tehran again set any preconditions to the second round of talks? That, however, is still an evolving situation. So now, let's connect with Mayank on this. Mayank, good morning. The ceasefire comes to an end. The second ceasefire with Lebanon and Israel, that stays. But however, will the talks actually happen tomorrow in Islamabad?
That's an interesting question, and the way the things are shaping up and the war of words has started, I mean, they are trying to make things as if it is uncertain. But then trends show something else. What we are trying to read, and you have already mentioned one of the points, is actually right before the first mediation, which had started right in the beginning, first week of the war, when it had took place on 28th of Feb. During that time only, I mean, there were reports that mediation had started between both sides, which is US and Iran. But Iran had categorically denied to it, and later on it came out that they were not agreeing to the conditions which were put forward for them. So that was one point. Second point was right before the first round of talks, which is on 11th of April, which took place. Iran had categorically again denied. I mean, they were saying that they would never be taking part in the negotiation there. But then they did, and not only did they brought in a huge entourage of delegates and people from every sphere were there, which I had been mentioning that central government governor was also there. I mean, yes. Central bank governor of Iran was also there, and that was so huge actually. So again, same thing is happening. So right before the things, because one point, Amita, Iran and Pakistan have a huge, long and large territorial border.
Yes.
So it is easier for them to cross. Where it takes almost 14 hours of flight from US if it is J.D. Vance who's coming, and US has already announced that he's be leading the talks there.
Yes.
So it takes long time for them.
Yes.
But before that, they can easily enter into Pakistan.
So that's what I said, a wait-and-watch policy that is now being taken up on part of Iran, exactly to see what would be the next step on part of US. However, already hitting out when it comes to President Trump declaring a victory in this Iran war, saying that US warmongering is something which is not acceptable to them. In the meantime, let's get you another round of breaking update, because President Trump, however, seems to be insisting that he is not under any pressure to make a peace deal with Iran. However, he says that one will be made relatively quickly. Now, on the other hand, Iran has been also sending mixed signals, saying that it has no plans for next round of negotiations, but they are on a standby mode. And as per reports, what has now been suggested, that a US delegation headed by the same delegation that is expected to visit Islamabad again. So as far as the delegation here is concerned, when we talk about President Trump's latest round of threats, he says that Iran violated the ceasefire agreement when it comes to firing of the bullets that happened in the Strait of Hormuz. That still remains a contentious issue, because after the first round of talks that failed in Islamabad, a US naval blockade was enforced. He says that $500 million is something that on a daily basis Iran is losing, and this is something which will cause major losses to Iran even in the short run. And there are several ships that are heading to the US when it comes to Texas and Louisiana and Alaska, that it seems to be on part of Iran that seems to be turning them around. And where he says that we are offering them a very fair and a reasonable deal and hope they take it. This is now coming in from the President of the United States of America, saying that no more Mr. Nice Guy, that that behavior, that conduct is long gone, because if Iran does not agree to their terms and conditions, that he's ready to blow up the country back to the Stone Age, and that kind of threat that he has given before. Now, when we talk about the second round of talks that are expected to happen tomorrow, Iran has now hit back, saying that we are not ready to surrender if this is what Donald Trump wants, because he says, and Iranian leadership has been saying that they will not accept the terms and conditions under the shadow of threats. And that kind of a threat that continues to loom large, because when it comes to the Iranian side, however, they say that US and its president have been consistently indulging in warmongering, and this is something which is not acceptable to them. As far as the national interest is concerned, that remains to be the top priority. So the issues that were of contention and why the talks failed during the first round of talks in dialogue that happened in Islamabad, will it be something similar, or there will be a certain back down on part of both sides over there? Because President Trump unilaterally has been claiming that the Strait of Hormuz has been opened, the passage is free again, NATO is a paper tiger. Then he's been taking on the Iranian side as well, saying that Iran has agreed to hand over its enriched uranium. This is something, all of these statements unilaterally that has been made by President Trump one by one are being denied by Iran, calling the US president and his statements to be a complete and an absolute lie. Let's in the meantime take a look exactly what President Trump has been saying, and which, when it comes to the Iranian counter that is now coming from their parliament speaker Ghalibaf, who is also said to be one of the other leaders who are expected to attend the second round of talks in Islamabad. And he says that President Trump, by imposing a siege and violating the ceasefire, seeks to turn the negotiating table in his own imagination into a table of surrender, or to justify renewed warmongering. And we do not accept negotiations under shadow of threats. And in the past 2 weeks, we are prepared to reveal new cards on the battlefield. So he is further also going on to say that if a ceasefire and a lasting ceasefire is not reached, or if a deal is not reached with the United States, then they are ready to again resume the battle with the United States. Srinjoy is joining us here on the broadcast. Srinjoy, good morning. The same question as far as when it comes to the ceasefire that now comes to an end, what happens next? Will the talks actually happen tomorrow in Islamabad?
First of all, it must be understood that when 39 days of fighting ended, both sides declared victory, which means that both said that we have won this war. Now, normally in a war, there is a clear victor and a clear loser. Now, if that happens, then the victor can address the loser, and the loser accepts the terms. Here, both sides have won, or both sides have said they have won. So once you're the winner, you want the war, you want the discussion to be on your terms. So the Americans have set certain terms. Open the Strait of Hormuz, no nuclear weapons, give us the 240 kilos of enriched uranium, and so on. The Iranians have separate terms. They have said, we want the nuclear program to go ahead. We will charge money for the Strait of Hormuz. There will be a cess. We want reparations for the bombing, etc., etc. Now, these are two sets of demands, and there is nothing in common.
Yes.
The only thing that can happen to start with is a decision that let's extend the ceasefire. That's the first decision. The second decision would begin with give and take. Now, give and take on these issues that are on the table. But first, you need to have a ceasefire.
Yes.
Secondly, even before that, you need both sides to sit together. Now, this time, there has been so much hesitancy on at least the Iranian side.
Yes.
They have not said that they were coming.
Well,
so
that's
it has
the
been
point,
yes,
because on
no.
part of President Trump, he seems to be contradicting again himself and there has been multiple statements, unilateral statements that has been made by him in the run-up to the second round of talks. Because as Shinjoy has been saying, because the first round of talks that happened in Islamabad that lasted for over 20 hours, however, failed to get any, when it comes to talking point that the war will finally end, but ceasefire that time was announced, and today, when it comes to a ceasefire, when the second round of talks are expected to happen, have now come to an end. So amid the escalation and between the two sides, America and Iran, especially after US seized an Iranian container ship near the Gulf, Iran, however, has now vowed to retaliate, stating that they will not submit to any force by the US, and there have been a lot of back and forth and mixed signals that are also coming in from Tehran's side. So let's take a look as far as the delegation and who exactly would be leading the front from both sides. J.D. Vance again seems to be heading the delegation representing the United States of America, and along with him Jared Kushner and also Steve Witkoff are expected to accompany him. On part of Team Tehran, let's take a look exactly when it comes to their parliament speaker, which is Ghalibaf, and also when it comes to the sitting foreign minister, Arakchi, is concerned. We are looking at, these two individuals holding the highest offices in Iran leadership. They are expected once again to lead the talks. Remember, last time it was a 70-member strong delegation on part of Iran that had reached Islamabad, but there is still uncertainty, and whether it comes to Iran would be forcing any other preconditions before the second round of talks, that also, however, remains to be seen. But this is a similar situation that is now playing out what happened during the first round of talks and before the second round of talks. So both sides, however, not sure of the negotiations. Let's in the meantime talk about certain reports that are now coming in where J.D. Vance, the US Vice President, is expected to leave for Pakistan. Now, these are reports coming in that J.D. Vance will be dispatched with the team representing the United States of America and President Donald Trump's will. And Iran says that they will join the talks if Vance attends. So is that a precondition, Mayank, that has now been set on part of Iran? Because as far as till the time J.D. Vance does not depart from the United States, Iran will not come to a decision.
Yes. Actually, I mean, right before the first round of talks took place on April 11th, it was in a way seen that J.D. Vance will be somebody who is acceptable to Iran side also, because I mean, even before the war had started and Operation Epic Fury had started, there were certain statements or a kind of a stance which was put up and put across by J.D. Vance in a way that he was not ready, or rather not fully supportive of the operations on Iran. So in a way, that can be seen as one of the reasons that Iran is, ready to take forward the talks, and these are very sensitive talks. So all said and done, what we can actually, the conjecture can be that J.D. Vance will be definitely there, because one thing we need to signify here is that the kind of bases which were in Middle East, they have been hit hard by Iran because they were within the ranges of their missiles, and that also is very significant because Central Command of the US has its bases there, and Fifth Fleet is also there.
Yes.
So what we need to understand is also, because that also becomes a sort of a pressure point which is not being discussed about, which is not being talked about. So if somebody says that they are not under pressure to go ahead for the talks, which is the US, it is wrong. So both sides have different reasons, and they have got their cards in their hands to play. Strait of Hormuz is another card which has been into the hands of Iran. They have used it as a strategic tool right from the beginning. So whether it's control or it's regulation of the vessel movement, it had been into the hands of Iran.
Yes, but these are outward projections that are now coming across from both sides, because that seems to be, threats and counter threats from both sides. But what exactly is meaningful is the dialogue that seems to be happening behind the scenes, and that actually bring both the sides, the warring sides, together to sit face to face across the table, because that did not happen during the first round of talks, and it was Pakistan that was playing the role of a mediator. This time, if there are talks that will happen likely, well, it seems that J.D. Vance is the person in charge for leading the second round of talks, and remains to be seen if Iran is acceptable to this front. But when we speak of both sides, when it comes to the negotiations, because there is still a lot of uncertainty and the road to peace is anything but straightforward, but there are deep divisions and trust deficit that still remains core issue. Let's talk about when it comes to Strait of Hormuz. This seems to be one of the other issues why the first round of talks failed. US refuses to end the naval blockade because that came into force after the first round of talks failed in Islamabad. Iran, however, says that it will not allow others to transit its own ships if they are blocked. And this is something which Iran has already done, which the US naval blockade that has been enforced has already done, denying interior exit of ships reaching or coming out of the Iranian ports. Enriched uranium, President Trump says that nuclear dust is something, or enriched uranium, which Iran has agreed to hand them over without any financial assistance. However, Iran has come to deny that very claim, saying that as far as its uranium enrichment is concerned, it is for civilian purposes and not for nuclear armament. Then, when it comes to another sticking issue that has been Lebanon, however, this more or less has been sorted. When it comes to another round of ceasefire that has been announced between Israel and Lebanon, and straight talks that has been taking place between the two sides minus Hezbollah. That seems to be when it comes to the contentious issues that Iran may take it up during the second round of talks. And when it comes to the other last sticking point that still remains is the ballistic missiles. US and Israel have been demanding that there should be a certain curb on Iranian ballistic missile program, which something Iran has been denying, saying that it maintains its right to missile capabilities, and this is something which is non-negotiable as it amounts to their national security. So now that seems to be as far as if there is a breakthrough and a possible breakthrough that could be achieved in the second round of talks, because now what is being said that even as the US is now gearing up for the second round of talks, reports are now possibly talking about what could be President Trump's strategy on Iran. Now, reports suggest that President Trump is willing to meet the Iranian leaders, and Trump will meet the Iranian leaders if the deal is reached, because this is something that, when asked from President Trump, if he will be also willing to, travel to Islamabad, Shinjoy, he had not denied this. Because he is now saying that as far as the current Iranian leadership is concerned, they are more acceptable to President Trump. And he has been insisting that US has achieved a breakthrough when it comes to regime change. However, in reality, that is not the same thing that he wanted has happened. But yes, there is the second and the third rung of leadership that has now, replaced the original.
Yes, yes, you're right. J.D. Vance was one of the few people. He was one of the few adults in the room when it came to the war on Iran, because he was the one who didn't appear to be very keen on going to war with Iran. And in retrospect, he's the one who can turn around, speak with other cabinet members and tell them, look, I told you so. It was going to be a lot of trouble. Now, what has happened is the talks are likely to happen. Till the last minute, it's always difficult to tell whether these talks will happen or not. But the other problem is, regardless of how, when the talks happen, whether it's today or tomorrow or whatever, the amount of grandstanding that goes on from both sides actually make the talks more difficult, more challenging, because if there is this much grandstanding, and that is inevitable with President Trump, and also increasingly with the Iranian leaders who have to reply. So to everything that Trump says, Trump will say that, look, we've destroyed the Iranian Navy and Air Force and air defense and this and that. So we have won the war. At which point the Iranians will also be forced to say, no, we've won the war as well.
Yes.
So as a result, this kind of grandstanding can make conversations across the table much more difficult. So it's much more challenging. So as a result, there are huge challenges before the talks begin.
Absolutely,
course,
and that still remains when we actually see, J.D. Vance leaving for Islamabad, and probably then, Iran will make up its mind to send its respective delegation to Islamabad. So there has been a lot of wait and watch and standby mode that both countries, however, seem in, that when it comes to the ceasefire that now comes to an end. Because the second round of these high-stakes truce talks between US and Iran now appears to be back on track, because what Washington has been indicating that once again J.D. Vance will be headed to Pakistan, and these talks come at a very critical juncture. With this fragile ceasefire that is all set to expire, leaving very little room when it comes to any diplomatic maneuvering. So the first round that ended without, any breakthrough, let's get you as far as the developments are concerned, and the tensions since then had only escalated. Because the big question, however, still remains, will the second round of talks finally deliver when it comes to the results, or are we headed for another deadlock? Let's get you an explainer, because how Islamabad seems to be now preparing for the second round of talks. There is a high security alert that has already been kept in place. And as far as for Islamabad is concerned, because it is projecting itself to be, when it comes to elevating itself to a role of a mediator is concerned. So 20,000 security forces, the personnel that is now kept in place, police that has now been brought up from different parts of the country there, and the entire area that has been fortified. Serena Hotel, again, it is said to be a 5-star. But there were certain reports that came in that no fee or no charges were levied on part of the hotel itself, and it was all free of cost there, because this was another question there, that if the talks had failed and these massive delegations that came in from both sides, then who exactly would be paying the hotel bill? What is being said that paramilitary rangers force that are in place, Islamabad police there. And remember, even when it comes to the first round of talks, there was a lot of secrecy that was maintained on part of the Pakistani government, which was not sharing details in real time of the talks that were happening between the two sides. And even when it comes to images that were shared, were a lot delayed. So as far as the venue is concerned, it is again being said that Serena Hotel could be the possible venue, and it is a 5-star facility with more than 400 plus rooms. Let's go back to Mayank on this. Mayank, the grandstanding on part of Pakistan on Islamabad is also concerned. This continues. And between, when it comes to the first and the second round of talks, its leadership, civilian and military, have also been engaging with Tehran and the United States.
Yes, they had been sort of imageries. They had been carrying the messages from US side, because if we remind our viewers, a few days back, Field Marshal Munir had led a big delegation, and Foreign Minister was himself part of it actually. That was interesting, because a uniformed officer was leading a delegation. That's another case which we can discuss further. But then he was carrying the message as far as from the US side was concerned. So which means there are certain details which are being discussed between the two sides. That is what it comes out, because unless that is there, what is the point of discussion as far as Iran and such a huge delegation is concerned? So there is some kind of a convincing or cajoling is going on between the three sides, and the messages have been coming or put back and forth from every side. So there one can expect that details might be thrashed out or will get discussed further if the second round of talks takes place, which most likely they will take place because of the trend. I'm trying to read the trend and then trying to signify or put across this point actually. So there are certain details, and specifically when we come down to talking to the details, immediately after the talk, first round of talk, and after almost 20 hours, while J.D. Vance was leaving back for US, he had said that everything was, nothing has come out. But then one point is very important on which they were relentless, was nuclear aspect. Then, if we have been hearing of the reports as percentage of enrichment of uranium, that is very important. So what we are trying to see here is actually the discussions might take place whether the enrichment, to the extent that it can be used for a nuclear arming, nuclear device, which is weapon grade enrichment, that should not take place. That could become one of the details actually, because
well, that was the main objective, that as to why US and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury in the first place, because they didn't want at any cost when it comes to Iran to have a nuclear weapon. Now, will this still remain a sticking point as to why talks failed in the first round? And when it comes to the second round of talks, because President Trump unilaterally has been claiming that Iran, without any financial package, has agreed to hand over enriched uranium, which Iran has been denying. So, Mayank and Srinjoy, thank you very much for joining in. Those are the war updates that we could pack for you in the first half of the Morning News. Back with lots more, joining you on the other side.
A twist and the narrative changes. A color aligns and the truth comes into focus. A mismatch and the questions begin. To get the full picture, every side matters.